What's up, everybody, and welcome to the State of Wild, episode 30, a regular YouTube video web series podcast thingy. My name is Meowth, and as usual, I'm joined from down under by my co-host CorbettGames. Corbett, how you doing tonight, dude?
Hey, what's up? Yeah, I'm doing okay. How you doing?
Doing well. It's been a very, very busy week, work-wise, but haven't been able to stream too much. But other than that, I've gotten a lot done, so I guess we'll take those, you know?
Yeah, I cannot claim any sort of productivity, so that's all on your end.
But yeah, we've got a ton going on in the Hearthstone scene this week. But before we go ahead and get started, just a reminder to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you guys enjoy our content. It really does support us a lot. But yeah, let's go ahead and talk about kind of the big thing that happened this week. On Thursday evening, U.S. time, we had a nerf to Hysteria, which ultimately killed the Tiller OTK combo deck that was terrorized in the metagame. So the nerf to Hysteria went for it to only be able to target enemy minions, which meant you can no longer target your own friendly immune wretched Tiller. I liked this nerf. I think it was future-proofing for Hysteria issues, and I think the big reason they didn't touch Deathspeaker was that it did enable some meme combos that they maybe wanted to keep a viable thing. So what do you think about the nerf? You happy with it?
Yeah, I really didn't like playing against the combo. So a lot of the predictions that we had, it was actually very funny. We were talking about the Tiller combo and stuff in the previous podcast, and then basically the second that we ended recording, they announced the news. They were going to hit it. So unfortunate timing on that one. But going over like last week, I was talking about how I didn't feel like the combo decks were very good. I did think that it was going to be good in Reno Lock, and I think that was bearing out. But ultimately, I think the combo in the non-pure list, so in things like Dark Lair or in lists that started to adapt like Void Call or Void Lord, those were stronger than I anticipated, even though the pure combo decks were like garbage. They were trash. Yeah. But I think just like randomly losing to like a 7-mana OTK just in spots where it felt like you shouldn't be losing, it felt horrible. It wasn't fun.
Yeah.
And I think that getting rid of that combo out of the format is like a 3-card OTK for 7 mana a lot of the time. I think it's just a good thing. I'm happy that they made this change.
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
I'm actually like genuinely curious. So it was a very quick nerf. Let's go ahead and commend them on that. It took a week, right, which was good. I do wonder though whether the nerf was due to the play pattern or like overall power, and I guess we'll never really know unless they come out and talk about it.
I guess it's I would say more the play pattern, but I do think it can be argued for both, right? Because they announced the nerf like the second day of the of the mini set, right?
Yeah.
And so by that stage, the people that were playing the combo were primarily still like these pure lists that weren't very good. And so I really do think that it was mostly like them assessing that this could be a problem once that kind of gets put in the right decks. So in that sense, it's a power thing. But I also think the play pattern was like horrific, and a lot of people were probably very mad and upset that they were dying to Tiller combos and things like that.
Yeah, I agree. My instinct is the play pattern was like the big driving force, and in the back of their mind, like as a secondary thing, it's like, okay, well, this also stops or prevents like refinement of those lists. Let's just go ahead and stop it now before it gets even worse. Yeah, I'm a big fan of it. So let's talk about Hysteria itself. So this was the card that was nerfed. What do you think about the power level of the card after the nerf? Only being able to target enemy minions does reduce some of the flexibility, I would say, of the card. But do you still think it's a very, very powerful card that people should be running in a lot of their Control Priest and Control Warlock decks?
Yeah, I think it's still like the primary focus of the card was always on, targeting the opponent's 4/3 and clearing off like a pair of 2/3s. So like a lot of time as Priest, you're not really having big minions on the board anyway, so it doesn't really take away that thing. There are rare situations where you could do things like Wave of Apathy and then like target your own scrapyard for like a very easy like full clear a lot of the time. So yeah, with the flexibility down, it sucks a little bit, but I think it's still like a very good card. I'm surprised they did hit it over the Deathspeaker. I feel like the immune keyword is probably a little bit more of a dangerous space, much in the way that the old rogue card that used to give stealth to a minion, but it wasn't like stealth till next turn. It was like give it stealth.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like Immune is sort of a similar thing where it does open up some dangerous stuff down the road, maybe. And also the fact that it was a wild card, whereas Hysteria is a standard card, makes me a little surprised. But I don't know, they went ahead and did this, and I mean, if they think it's fine and they think that, you know, Death Speak will be fine, then, you know, so be it. I'm happy they just hit it at all.
Yeah, I think the nerf to Hysteria was like future proofing for Hysteria abuse. Whereas I think if they wanted to future proof for the sake of like degenerate wild combos, I think Death Speaker was probably the way to go, right? Because immediately after they announced that Tiller was going to be nerfed, I think Yada, who was one of the guys who kind of found this original Tiller combo to begin with, immediately was like, okay, well, you can do like the same thing with Mana Saber, right? Play Mana Saber on 4 and then play Death Speaker plus Hysteria, and then you have 10 mana on turn 5 and you can do whatever you want, right? So I think for future-proofing wild combos, I think Death Speaker might have been the way to go, but we'll see. What that does is, so it's been 30 hours since the nerf, and it's kind of the first 30 hours that we've had, you know, the ability to look at what the wild meta is going to look like, you know, moving into Darkmoon races. Yeah, so this is the first time we're going to get a look at this metagame, and let's just reassess. Let's take a step back. Let's look at cards themselves. So last week when we had Dane on the show, we talked about our standout cards, you know, in the first couple of days of Darkmoon Fair. And so we talked about Nitro Boost, Hysteria, Conjure Mana Biscuit, Backfire, Armor Vendor. It's all being very, very strong standout cards from Darkmoon races in Wild. Has your opinion of any of these changed, or have you been even more impressed than you were last week about a couple of these cards? Or do you think there's something missing maybe?
I think the big two that are like potentially a little less than what people think, I think Nitro Boost is actually a bit more awkward than people give credit for in Kingsbane Rogue. I think it's a very strong card in, you know, like Pirate Warrior and in Odd Rogue in particular. Odd Rogue, it's really good in Odd Rogue. But I think in Kingsbane, it's actually a little bit more awkward than people think. And
Really?
the stats on it aren't great right now, which is quite interesting.
Okay. It's interesting that you say that, because like I've played a fair bit of Kingsbane Rogue, and it's felt really easy to corrupt and very strong, personally. So it's interesting why you think that. I know, like, stats aside, right? Why do you feel like Nitro Boost might be underperforming in the list? Is it because we're cutting down on the 2-drops maybe? Because I've seen a lot of people cutting Foxy Frauds and Swindles from their list.
I think it is just some awkwardness where you find yourself often targeting the opponent's minion for the attack buff. In Standard, for example, the card performs really well because they're running lots of stealth cards in their like sword sharpening deck. So they can always basically like stealth develop, and then they like always have the target on their side.
Yeah.
In Wild, the Kingsbane decks don't tend to have minion presence a lot of the time. Especially not proactive minion presence, because like often you don't have minions on your side of the board, and that way like when you go to a buff it, they're not really doing anything unless you hit like a deckhand. That's kind of the exception.
Okay.
Hitting things like a Dread Corsair, like if you have a 5/3 taunt or a 3/3 taunt, it doesn't really matter. Either way, it's going to get cleared regardless. And so I also think that, combined with the fact that it is a little bit hard to corrupt, I think it is a little bit, because, you know, you're not playing a lot of like 2-drops explicitly. So I think it's still like a fine card. Like, you're not cutting it from the deck. I just think it's potentially a bit more awkward and weaker than people might anticipate. Even if the high roll that you can get with it, the high roll that you can pop off with like a 9-attack Bane or something on like turn 4 or turn 3, it's still disgusting. But I think there are times where it sits in your hand a little bit.
Well, I wonder, maybe to like ease this like awkwardness of Nitro Boost Poison, I wonder if you ever shift back to the ship's cannon.
I mean, that's what I've been doing.
Yeah. And get the eviscerate, the Foxy Frauds, all that kind of nonsense.
Yeah, it's very tough to find the slots, but I actually tried cutting Swindle because I wasn't running Foxy. And so I kind of had to think about it. I'm like, is Swindle actually that good enough? Like, should I just not be playing 2-drops maybe? I don't know. It's something I'm toying with because it's a very tight list.
Kelisov coming back? Ooh, maybe?
No.
But yeah, it's interesting. I think that's an opinion that not a lot of people share. So yeah, maybe it ends up we're gonna have to refine and tweak the list. There's plenty of time. It's only been 30 hours. What's your second one? You mentioned another.
Backfire. Backfire is interesting, where there does seem to be a little bit of conversation about just how good it is in like Dark Lair Warlock. where I've heard players talking about how awkward it is sometimes. I think in Backfire in Dark Lair Warlock, I genuinely think this is a case where players just aren't playing the card. And that might sound like a dumb thing to say, but I mean, often there are situations where it's like turn 3 and people still are like life tapping or developing minions, and they're not just playing the Backfire. And the Backfire gets so much worse the longer you hold it. I think like coining Backfire in Dark Lair Warlock is also like a really, really strong play that people might not be making. In general, like coining Backfire is just like really good a lot of time in Warlock. And people are so ingrained with the idea that you have to like tap on 2 as a Warlock. But I think it might just be more of an awkwardness thing. Because I've heard mixed things where some people have felt that it's been good, and a lot of people have said that it's been like rough and they don't think it's actually worth the slot. I think it's actually like pretty solid in Dark Lair Warlock.
Yeah, I found that a lot of the people that are saying that it might be a little bit awkward are also trying to use it in the same turn that they're comboing, and I don't think that's where the power from Backfire comes. I think the power in Backfire is, hey, it's a 3-mana draw 3 to set up your powerful Dark Lair combo, right?
Yeah.
And I've been playing a lot of Q-Block and Reno Lock recently, and that card is like absolutely nuts in those decks, and I think if you're not running it in any slow Warlock deck, I think you're actually just trolling, because 3-mana draw 3 towards your good cards in the matchup is very good. I have found myself doing like a very popular play that I've been doing is like coin Void Caller on 3 into Backfire on 4, and you coin the Void Caller on 3 even if you don't have the demon in your hand.
The demon.
And draw 4 cards the next turn to find it.
And people rarely call that bluff, right? Like I'm a fan of calling that bluff sometimes, but like not many people like to call that bluff and trade into the Void Caller.
Yeah, I think Backfire is just as good as like advertised, and I think might even be a little bit better than advertised once people like learn when and how to play the card. I think it's a very, very strong card.
Yeah.
Okay, and so then talking about some cards that were having a little bit of a lesser impact, but still, had potential in our format. Last week we talked about Illidari Studies, Arbor Up, Spark Joy Cheat, and Spiked Wheel. I want to talk a little bit about Arbor Up because I think that's a card that's been gaining a lot of standard traction the past week. The Spell Druid that we've been talking about for like a month now has kind of caught on in standard. A couple different versions running around. I know there's a Treant build and there's a Gibberling Druid build running around standard. But dude, Arbor Up is everything this deck wanted, man. It's so good. I absolutely love the card. Board development plus buff. It's absolutely insane. How are you feeling about Arbor Up?
So with Arbor Up, I had it as one of my like performing potential cards in the set, but I felt like it was going to be a really good card in a bad deck. I think the first part's right. I think the second part's wrong. I think the card is obviously really strong, but I think Token Druid in Wild is actually a bit of a sleeper, and we'll maybe get into that later. But a lot of people in Standard are seeing the power of the deck, and I think it's actually catching on a little bit in Wild. I actually ran into some mirror matches and things today. It might just be because new thing equals fun, but yeah, Arbor Up may be enough to kind of carry Token Druid to a little bit of relevance.
I'm not one to usually boast or claim credit, but I will say I was the hipster that was playing this deck first. I'm just gonna put that out there. I've been standing for this deck for a long, long time.
But yeah, if the deck gets popular,
I can't play it anymore.
Don't you have to you have to distance
yourself,
yourself, right? You can't claim it. Yeah, if it's meta, then you can't have it. Just like Dark Lair all over again, right?
True. Okay, guys, we're gonna talk a lot about Token Druid today. Don't play it, all right? Totally not. But yeah, okay. So we talked about cards. I will say, let's move into talking about meta. I will say that.
Oh, I want to mention one card if that's okay.
Okay,
one card that we slipped through that we didn't touch. Crab Rider. Dude, Crab Rider is busted.
Yeah. Crab Rider. Okay, I saw that card.
Mentioned Crab Rider.
Yeah, I saw that card and I was like, this is gonna be really like a niche card, decent card in hand buff palette. Dude, the card's just kind of like overall nuts. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, it's insane. In hand buff, I had a big brain idea revelation today that we're meant to play Corpse Taker, because now the Corpse Taker has Wind Fury and it scales really well. With all the hand buffs, right? It gets like a 5/5 Divine Shield, like Taunt,
So what are your other Divine Shields
Wind
on the
Fury.
list?
Well, you're running Righteous and Argent and Ziliax, so you have lots of Divine Shields.
Okay.
So you're basically guaranteed to give it the Divine Shield, and the Wind Fury is so good. It's so strong. So I like, it's such a busted thing. But in general, like Crab Ride is just like, it's insane. Like we should probably be playing it in things like Aggro Druid, I think.
Well, Aggro doesn't exist anymore, right? Because the version.
Well, whenever it comes back. But yeah.
I will say I did try to revisit the water package, right? The Finja Murkai plus Crab Rider package.
Yeah.
I will say playing a 3-mana 3/3 War Leader sucks.
Yeah, not great, right?
It's really bad. And
Yeah.
as good as Crab Rider is, I don't think Finja's like quick enough either. So I think
Finja has to be like 4 mana
Yeah.
nowadays. Like there's no way at 5 mana.
But I will say, I think Crab Rider itself, outside of the water package, I think is a sleeper. Like even Paladin probably wants this. I wonder, like I'm thinking about even Shaman. Whether like even Shaman just wants to run a 2-mana 1/4 with Wind Fury and Rush. And maybe I haven't looked at the cards in the list, but maybe we even like visit Corpse Taker in that list as well. Maybe and even Shaman probably not gonna scale nearly as well as an even or hand buff Paladin.
I think any deck that buffs minions on board wants this. Like any aggro deck. So like in even Shaman, I don't see as much because it doesn't really
Crab
have
Rider
any
plus
buff.
the Reader, right? The Wriggling Horror. Sorry, not the Reader.
Yeah, with Wriggling it's okay, but
It's
you're
not
not.
as
That's like such a. It's only like a 2 of, right? So there's not really a ton of
true.
buffs. But I think things like aggro druid or like an aggro pally with like Blessing of Might or like Hand of Adal. Like there's a lot of stuff you can do in some of these classes with Crab Rider, and the cards are it's unreal.
Maybe something that did slip through our cracks last week, and something to keep an eye on moving forward. But yeah, let's take a little bit of a step back and talk kind of metagame. We were complaining, many, myself included, were complaining about 3 decks kind of dominating the metagame prior to Darkmoon races, right? We were talking about Secret Mage, we were talking about Arena Priest, we were talking about Darkglare Warlock as kind of like the big 3. And the devs did say that they thought a lot of cards from these sets, from this Darkmoon races set, were going to shake up Wild. And do you think that it has shaken up Wild? I think we've seen a big buff to Kingsbane Rogue. I think we've seen a huge buff to Odd Rogue. And something that's not really being talked about, I think Hysteria is an absolutely massive buff to Big Priest. And so in my opinion, I think that big 3 is going to become a big 6, maybe, in my opinion, with maybe like Odd Warrior kind of floating around and Odd Paladin a little bit below that. So I guess technically it's probably going to shake up the meta as promised. That's just my opinion, 30 hours in, so I could totally be wrong. But what is your idea? Do you think it's going to shake up the metagame?
Not really, to be honest. Like I think I don't know if this is a shake. This is more like a slight shuffle. Like there's not really a ton going on here in terms of decks really moving placement, right? I don't think you're wrong in talking about the types of decks. I think that the format, particularly, the Diamond until Legend ranks, will still be dominated by Secret Mage. I think Kingsbane Rogue though will that is probably the deck that will receive the most attention, and like the biggest increase in play rate. But that was already like a tier 1 deck or like borderline, right? So it's kind of tough to stay. I think the meta in general will become a little bit more diverse at higher ranks. I think the meta will become more diverse because I think the Darkglare will be more feasted on by Kingsbane. And I think in general, things like Big Priest got support, and they'll just be a little bit more wide range. But overall, it'll still be the same 7 or 8, 9 decks that we've been all playing for a while now, I think.
Yeah, so the 6 plus Odd Warrior plus Odd Paladin, you think those would be like the big 8?
Yeah, I think it's like Pirate Warrior and stuff will still be around. But I mean, no one ever wants to play Odd Rogue, dude. Like Odd Rogue is probably I don't know. Odd Rogue could be the best deck in the format right now, and people still wouldn't want to be playing it. I don't know. Yeah,
Dean talked about that a little bit. We'll get to that in a bit when we talk about our news of the week. But yeah, I guess the question comes when we want. I say we. I don't really want shakeups in the metagame. It's not really. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. It's not really something that I want. But they did promise that the meta was going to be different. Do you think that? This is a very impossible question that I'm going to ask you because it's reading the minds of everybody out there on Twitter and Reddit. Do you think people are going to be happy with the meta changing? Do you think people are going to be happy with Darkmoon Race's impact on Wild?
No. And it's not because anything's bad's going to happen. I just think it's a side effect of things remaining pretty similar. And people just you just leave people in a box like this for a long time. It doesn't matter how many cool stuff is in the box. People get sick of it. They get sick of whatever toys they're playing with. They get bored and they move on. And so I think like by the end of this, because this mini set didn't have that much of an impact, and because the nerfs that have happened also didn't have that much of an impact. Like there was the Polk out nerf, but that was very early in the expansion cycle. I think by the end of this, people are going to be a little bit worn out because things have overall impacted Wild in a pretty small way.
So for those of you guys that are listening, I think this is something that we want to hear from you guys. Let us know down in the comments if you're happy with these changes, with the new cards that have been infused into the metagame, and if you're happy with the decks that are getting buffs. Let us know. We want to hear from you. My initial response is that I think people are going to be... I don't want to say happy, but I think people are going to get a little bit frustrated very quickly because the decks that are getting powerful, right, are Big Priest and Kingsbane Rogue. I think those are the big two that I want to hone in on because everybody's going to be playing Kingsbane, and a lot of people are going to be playing Big Priest. I will admit I have been playing an abnormal amount of Big Priest, given that I have never played Big Priest, and so but I think Big Priest is an extremely strong deck, dude. I think Big Priest is nuts. And I will say, adding on those two decks onto decks like Secret Mage, Rainer Priest, and Darkly Warlock, people aren't going... people already don't like losing to those decks, and when they become extremely popular, I think people are going to be very vocal about losing to those decks.
I think that this current meta, I don't think it's the worst. I really don't think it's the worst meta that we've had. I just think that it doesn't matter how good a meta is. A lot of the time, you can have an 8 out of 10 meta, like above average pretty clearly. But if it kind of stays the same for a while, people do get a little bored of it until the expansion comes out. And I just think that'll happen because, it's just the way it goes. But, we'll see. We did get some new toys and some new stuff. So we have talked about, Token Druid. We have talked about a hand buff Pally. I think there's a chance hand buff Pally might actually catch on. I think enough is happening with hand buff Pally that I can see it. I can just see a little bit of a glimmer for hand buff Pally gaining some traction. I wouldn't be surprised.
So, Corbett, if you had to label sleepers, we've talked about this already, so maybe they're not even sleepers. But if you had to label them, I think you'd label hand buff Paladin, Token Druid. I would put Libram Paladin up there. I've been playing some Libram Paladin. It's pretty damn good against things that aren't Big Priests, to be completely honest with you. The new weapon feels really good against Secret Mage. Real talk. It's really good
for sure.
Any other decks that you kind of want to put up there? Handbuff Paladin, Token Druid, Libram Paladin.
I mean, does Oddrogue count? Oddrogue is always the perpetual sleeper. Trying to think of anything off the top of my head. I think Q-Block is worth revisiting a little bit, but it's not really a totally fresh idea. I think Odd DH with Illidari studies is probably be better than people think. And I think that the last one would be, I think there might be something with the Priest Rally stuff, like the Nazmani. I don't think so necessarily, but there's a chance. I can see it.
I feel like the Nazmani package, Nazmani Bloodweaver, has the potential to do some insanely busted stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I'm scared. I think if not now, if not in the next expansion, soon, eventually, that card's going to be absolutely bonkers in our format.
Oh, and sorry, one more to remember. Aggro Rogue, not Kingsbane, but just hooked Scimitar Aggro Rogue. I think that deck's actually very good as well. But because it's redundant, I don't think it'll catch on at all. Because why not make Kingsbane?
So it's Labora Song.
Labore,
I'm gonna always mispronounce his name, and I apologize if you're listening. But I got smacked by a 9-attack Scimitar on turn 4, and I was just like, what is this deck, dude? I think there is a lot to kind of revisit because I've been playing a little bit of that self-sharpening sword rogue in standard I like messing around with the new standard decks just for a couple games just to kind of see their play patterns and if there's anything we can move over to wild. And I think there's a little bit of something there. Just pure aggro and he just goes face, dude. Nothing but minions that hit face and weapons that hit face.
Yeah.
I do find myself running out of steam a lot. If you don't draw secret passage in that deck, your deck sucks. But I mean, if you draw Scimitar, your first 2 or 3 turns are absolutely bonkers. So I could see something being there potentially.
Yeah, it's faster than Kingsbane.
Way faster.
It doesn't have the same mid game that Kingsbane does, where Kingsbane get up to 9 attack weapon, and so it's going to struggle a lot worse into Odd Warrior. But you're probably just favored in the mirror because you're quicker, right? So yeah, we'll see though.
I do want to also brag again one more time. I know I said that I'm not one to boast, but I'm going to say this. I said last week, I think it's a very good time to be a rogue main in Wild, right? I think there's a
Yeah.
lot of really, really strong rogue decks out there right now, and
hmm
and I think I was right. I think Kingsbane, Odd, Aggro, um, like Shuffle Rogue has been like that whole shuffle package has been really, really good. I think there's a lot going for Rogue. I think Rogue, you know how we were boasting up, you know how we were talking up Warrior last year was like the darling of the format in 2020. I think Rogue is.
hmm
I don't want to say darling because I think people are going to come to hate Rogue really quickly by running double ooze and everything. But I think Rogue right now is like the standout of late 2020, early 2021. I think Rogue mains are very,
Yeah.
very happy right now.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so moving on from the meta to talk about our news of the week. This segment should just be labeled Iksar of the week, honestly, because that's kind of what this segment has become. Because Iksar,
Dude, he's just giving us content.
yeah, I mean,
Amazing.
yo, shout outs to Iksar, praise be. But no, Iksar, even after the whole fiasco last week with his comments on Wild, has continued to do his Q&A, and I think it's been awesome. Not as exciting, I guess, content coming out of it this week, but there was still some really interesting nuggets to pull out. So the first one I want to talk about was they brought up the idea of reprints in Hearthstone. So the idea was floated out initially when they created this rotating format, right, where cards were going to rotate to Wild, where you would basically reprint the same card, whether it was the exact same card or it was basically a new skin, right, like a new name, new art. And if that would be something that they would do, or would they rather always create something new? And so he said, we've talked about this so many times, I think reprints can be good, and we'll probably do it someday. We were extremely close to reprinting Web Spinner for Unguro, but changed it 75% of the way through design, and so it changed into Jeweled Macaw, I believe was the card that it ended up becoming.
That makes sense.
It always just feels like we can accomplish the same thing through a very small tweak and just make a new card. So we do that instead. Eventually, there will be a time that isn't the case, and we'll probably reconsider. So, what are your thoughts and feelings on this? I know reprints in Magic are kind of a huge thing because of the cost of cards. In Hearthstone, it's not really that relevant, right? Because we don't own physical cards, and especially for us in WoW, once we have the card, we have it for forever. So, what are your feelings on reprints in a digital space like Hearthstone?
Well, I don't have the same background from Magic, so I can really only speak about it from, just like what I've picked up tangentially from Yu-Gi-Oh and Magic and other card games. But in Hearthstone, I think that I think that, like, if you can tweak the card, that's always preferred. I'd rather create a new experience, I think, than revisit something. If you're at the point where you want to reprint a card, like you need it that badly in the format, I think you might as well just put the card back into like a basic set. Like I think if that's like the foundation piece, like this card is perfect and we want to recreate this experience, it should just be a basic card, because otherwise you should be looking to create something new. Even if it is something as small as like Web Spinner to Jewel Macaw, just like Death Rattle to Battle Cry. I just think that there are a lot of ways that we can make those subtle changes in Hearthstone. I think if they do it as well in Wild, they would have to like restrict the deck building, I assume, because
I think
I can't imagine. Yeah, I can't imagine they could let you run 4 copies of one card, right? That seems very strange to me. And so that also gets into like a logistic issue. Like, can we not run the same card even if it's differently named and stuff? But yeah, I hope that I think reprints a lot of the time are just like for pure nostalgia, and they're not necessarily thought about in terms of like, does this actually make a better experience? Why does something have to be the exact same when we can do something slightly different?
Or I like, instead of printing a 1/1 web spinner, I mean, you could print like a 1/2 web spinner, and give a boost.
You can buff a weaker card. Yeah.
Exactly. I think my big thing is like, for purely selfish reasons, I can't say that word for some reason. I'm a big fan of not doing reprints in Hearthstone, because what that means is we end up eventually having like cards, like 4 to 6 to 8 cards with very similar effects, and that's when you get decks like Secret Mage, right, with completely insane synergy between all 30 cards that overlap and do powerful things together. And I think I would much rather have decks like that in Wild rather than decks that are carried by like purely singular strong cards. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I don't even know if that's really selfish, but I as somebody who plays the WoW format Primarily, I'm a big fan of just print the same effect on a new body so that I can run 4 of them instead of just the 2. I think it's my big thing. But yeah, I also just want to point out, you say my Magic background. I've been playing Magic for like over a year and a half. I've just been playing it super in depth, so I know a lot about it. But any of you guys that are listening, if you hear me say something stupid, please correct me, because I am not somebody who's completely invested for years and years and years in the game. But yeah, let's move on to our next question, asked by the one and only CorbettGames. So he asked, always find it fun hearing about strong decks that went completely under the radar. So I think Ben Brode talked about an elemental pirate warrior in Unguro that was like super powerful. This probably happens way less nowadays in Standard given the information flow, but are there any examples of this specifically for Wild? He responded, it honestly doesn't really happen anymore, at least not in the way that you describe. The most common case is usually that there's a deck that people know is good, but it's kind of boring and there's some high roll exciting deck next to it. Odd Rogue. So then the old boring deck goes under the radar completely for long stretches, even when it's the best thing you should be doing. Highlander, Hunter, and even Paladin were examples of this in Standard. Odd Rogue is in this category for Wild. Hey. In terms of new undiscovered strategies, it's pretty rare we identify something in playtesting that's totally disregarded by the public for any real amount of time. So, I mean, this completely kind of backs up our theory about stuff like Odd Rogue and Odd Paladin and even Shaman and decks like that. But I also find this really interesting as a comparison to the argument that some Standard players have made, where there are huge, undiscovered, powerful decks that we're just completely missing as a format. And so I think, first of all, thanks for asking such a great question, Corbett. But what were your thoughts about his response? Did you have the same feeling?
Yeah, I knew what the answer was going to be regarding Standard because of things like Vicious Syndicate and HS Replay. I was curious about the Wild answer, and I think what you're saying is true, right? Where this is actually this answer appears to be really boring on paper, like no, there aren't anything, but it's actually interesting because it does provide backing to the idea or evidence against the idea that Wild is actually secretly populated by these super strong decks that people just have no idea about because Wild players don't know what they're doing and stuff like that. And so yeah, I thought this answer was really interesting. I guess like the thing in Standard is that with the information flow, that's the thing that really slows it down. In Wild, I think the argument is basically that because the archetypes are so old and so established and the shells are so established, it's very easy to slot new cards sort of into those shells, and it's hard to really deviate from them. And it also means that when something is obscenely powerful in Wild, it's kind of pretty easy to spot and start abusing quickly. And it's kind of rare that anything that's too strong goes under the radar. I think a lot of the time tier 2 and tier 3 decks, like things that are solid, go under the radar for a long time. But that's not really the same thing as like the best deck in the format not really being played very much at all.
Or undiscovered at that point, yeah.
Or unknown about, I guess. Yeah.
I will say that there are probably some like tier 3, tier 4 decks that are like not very discovered, but I think the notion of like super powerful decks not being discovered, I think, is what you're getting at there. So yeah, and then the next question is kind of more back to the design aspect of cards, talking about tribal spells. So are tribal spells a win or an if? Basically spells with either existing minion types or totally new spell types like arcane, fire, etc. So this is another card design that they have talked about, and they'll confidently put this in the when category. So again, comes back to, I know that these are a thing in Magic, but I never played when they were a thing, and I don't play them currently in any format that I play. But I know that there's stuff like tribal spells for elves, right? Where you're playing an elves-based deck, which is like a tribal deck, and then you have this spell that will generate more tokens, or they'll do something to your elves. And so
are these just Librams, basically?
Yeah, I think Librams or like the Totemic Surges and Mites of the world. Like,
okay,
I think cards like that would probably fall into this tribal spells. I'm kind of interested in this like an arcane spell and stuff like that. But how I'm understanding tribal spells. So for those of you guys that play Magic, please correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like it's completely like the Librams or the totem spells in Shaman that don't really have like a common name that you group them with. But those are what I'm thinking about when I think tribal spells.
Well, the thing about the Librams is they're the only ones that actually receive discounts for being a type, right? Like, because they feel like a very Yu-Gi-Oh effect, where Yu-Gi-Oh would be something like all your, like it could be anything, like some name, like like some tag, like Zombeast or something. All your Zombeast spells cost yada yada, cost less, or like have more attack, or minions have more attack. It feels something like that, where Librams are the same thing, right? Where they all collectively get this bonus. And so I guess that's more the thing with like the totem spells is they currently don't function like that, right? Librams are the one thing that does this. And so I think I'm down for this. Like I'm down for this. I've kind of liked how the Librams have worked so far. Even if it is a bit parasitic, which feels kind of bad. But yeah, I'd be interested in this.
Well, so I'm thinking like, look, let's say Kangor's Endless Army, this like unknown spell that nobody knows about, nobody plays. Like if that was like a mech tribal spell, and it
gets like mech warper discounts,
or like galvanizer discounts and stuff like that, right? Like
okay,
I guess maybe that's how they're thinking about tribal spells, and I think that'd be really really cool. All right, so we've only got two more kind of highlights to touch on here. So how do you think the Darkmoon Race's release has gone with such an abbreviated preview cycle? So if you remember, they revealed the mini set on Tuesday, and the mini set came out on Thursday. So 2 days, they released all the cards at once. Do you think that the limited amount of pre-release coverage changed the initial meta's development? And is the team considering adjustments to set preview timings and events going forward? So I think this very first part of the question is very geared towards the pre-release events that receive a lot of attention about streamers, and we can touch on that maybe this isn't the place for that, but I think that's where that question is initially like a loaded question based upon that. And then they continue on. I wonder if they would have changed Hysteria before release if they had revealed it early enough. It was clear it was going to be a problem from day -2. I saw the combo, but it's hard to tell if something's going to be problematic just because it's possible this wasn't as visibly dangerous as Snip Snap and Reckless Experimenter. And so Iksar responds, even if you know something exists and a decent chance you might have to change it, sometimes we still make the call to let the card slip through. When you trim all the rough edges off of your game, it becomes less interesting in the world where there's a really weird strat that exists, but is slightly less powerful or popular than it turned out to be. So basically what they're saying is like they knew Tiller Warlock was going to be a thing, but they didn't think it was going to be as powerful or as popular as it was. Things like this are a big positive. It reminds people that the game is not just about board control. Some crazy combos can happen. I think in this case we knew about it on the late side in development, but if it was an oh shit moment, we would have just changed it pre-release. They took the risk in this case, and it just didn't work out. So yeah, I mean, they just didn't touch on the first part. Maybe we can come back to that. But basically the big takeaway here is that they realized this area was coming, that this combo was coming. They didn't think it was powerful. It was going to be as powerful or as popular as it ended up becoming, but they were okay taking the risk because if it didn't end up being super powerful or super popular, then they were okay with crazy combos being a thing in Hearthstone in general. So what is that kind of the big takeaway as well?
Yeah, just that they don't have to have everything sort of perfectly planned, and if something is unintended, it can be fine. I'm totally fine with them doing this. Like I'm actually like a-okay that they let the combo into the game. I didn't think it needed to be hit pre-release, and the thing that I like though is that they immediately recognized that it did warrant a hit in their eyes, and that they made a change very very quickly. So as long as they're like, I don't mind that they take risks or anything. I think it's great actually, and makes the end product a lot better. Trying to push things to the limit, but the biggest thing is I love that they just were willing to walk it back when they felt like they had to.
Yeah, 100% agree with everything you just said. And now I kind of want to extrapolate on this question a little bit, just for the sake of content, right? #content. So a couple of questions. Were you a big fan of the very, very short preview cycle? You saw the cards on Tuesday, it came out on Thursday. Were you a big fan of that? Because I know I was.
I think it could have been a little bit more strung out for me. Like maybe a couple days. Like maybe we could have done like 2 days or 3 days of reveals. But overall, I liked the short cycle. I'd say like I'd rather this than string it out over 2 weeks. Like I think this is a lot better.
I mean, I was a fan of it coming out on Tuesday. or being announced Tuesday and coming out on Thursday. I would have liked for it to have been announced earlier so that we knew what date the thing was coming. But I was okay with all the cards being released in one day. Because I remember like being in your chat while I was at work as all these cards were being revealed. And like every 45 minutes we saw a new batch of 5 cards, and it was really
actually
exciting.
pretty fun.
It was super
really
exciting.
Fun, actually.
And I love the hype of that. And then I love the fact that I didn't have to wait 3 weeks to then be able to play with those cards. Right? We saw all these kind of cards.
You're convincing me out. You know what? This is actually perfect. I don't need my extra day. This is actually super.
I mean, I wonder, it's a lot harder to do with 135 cards compared to 35. But I was a big fan of like how they treated this, and I hope it's something that they do in the future. But now let's even go further. Let's dive a little bit deeper. The very first part of this question is, I think, very, very loaded, like I mentioned, right? Where a lot of the streamer events, so for those of you guys that don't know what I'm talking about, basically every expansion, so they have a final reveal stream where they reveal all the cards, and then like 2 or 3 days before the expansion, they have like a pre-release event where a lot of the big streamers in the community get to play with the cards early against each other and get to brew decks and play viewer decks that are submitted and everything like that. I will say that it receives a lot of negative backlash on Twitter and Reddit, and unfortunately even in those like Twitch streams themselves, which really sucks for the content creators, because a lot of people think that it helps solve the metagame and it helps ruin the excitement of these new cards, because the first time you're seeing them is not when you're playing with them, right? It's when other people are playing and doing things with the cards. I will say, from a content creator aspect, I know you can maybe mention this, but you can't fault any of those people for doing the pre-release events. It's an amazing opportunity for them. And my mindset's always been, they're obviously doing it for a reason, right? Like, even with all the negative backlash on Twitter and Reddit, there's obviously some benefit to them doing these streamer events. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, right? When it comes in terms of marketing to more casual players, I think, specifically. And I'm always in the mindset, I don't enjoy them because I don't want my expansion experience ruined, so I just don't watch them, right? Which is always my mindset. I'm curious how a lot of other, like, those of you guys that are listening, let us know what you guys feel about this. But I'm also interested in what you think, Corbett.
Yeah, I don't fault the streamers at all. They get paid, they get reimbursed to do that, and they get a lot of hype and views on their stream, and that's all like good for them. No downside there. Blizzard side, ultimately they wouldn't do it if it didn't make sense, like on their marketing side. So fair enough. But at the same time, I still despise it. Like, can we swear on here? I kind of want to
go for it, dude.
I fucking despise the pre-release thing that they do. I hate it so much. I hate it. It's just not fun. Like, it's just not fun. I don't like that people get exclusive access and it's made public. It's one thing if you brought in play testers specifically, and it was like behind closed doors and they got the chance to play with the cards and give feedback and things like that. That's one thing. I hate that this is like a publicly displayed thing where we can't get access to it and a select few people do. I don't like watching them. And so on the one hand, who am I to complain? But on the other hand, I have to experience the game that everyone else is playing, right? And so, like, I don't live in this little bubble where, like, my own entire Hearthstone existence can be hidden from the outside world, because I have to interact with other people in the video game, and the video game is affected by, like, what the streamers are playing. And so when things get figured out, when things get spotted as being bad or not, I just do think the meta becomes a little bit more solved quickly. But apart from that, it's not just about the meta being solved. I just don't like the idea of, like, the experiences, everything that cool that you want to do and experience yourself, just being kind of showcased and out there a week before the set even has the chance to come out. I hate it. I hate it so much. And I really hope that whatever they're doing and whatever is working for them marketing wise, I hope it all goes south. And I don't mean that as like a thing against Blizzard.
There goes any chance we had, Corbett. Come on, dude.
I hope that like they just find something else that works, is how I should phrase it. I hope that they find that this isn't the best option, because I really despise it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I think the argument that it helps contribute to the meta being solved just isn't really a factor because I feel like a lot of the decks that we see, um, seeing play or people hyping up. I always remember like Firebats, Reno, Demon Hunter, on day one of like the pre-release of Ashes of Outland, and that just like never really existed. I think HS Replay, Vicious Syndicate probably have a much bigger influence on that than these pre-release events on day one. But I will say, like, I'm with you. I don't like the concept of them, right? I think the thing is more it ruins excitement for me playing. Like, let's say Deck of Chaos was a card. Let's say I was really hyped to play that card, right? It did end up being garbage, but if I knew that it was garbage before I even got to play with it because I saw other people playing it and it ended up being garbage, it kind of ruins my excitement for day one of the expansion. And I think that's the thing. And I think the argument of like, I know I don't watch them personally, and I support a lot of the streamers that do get access to them, and I think it's great that they do. Like you said, I'm still on Twitter, and that's like something that I have to do as a streamer. Is I have to be on Twitter, I have to be on Reddit, I have to be doing these things. And then you see people talking about, oh, Attack of Chaos wasn't great, guys, like, or whatever, and then like it naturally happens, and it is a little bit disappointing. And so I think I've heard a lot of positive things about the Darkmoon Races release, right? The very quick turnaround, and I wonder if that's something that they do eventually, expand on and potentially work into regular expansion sets, kind of moving forward. And I don't think that the pre-release events are going anywhere because obviously they do something positive, right? Otherwise they wouldn't be doing it. But yeah, I mean, that's like a whole other argument for a whole other episode that we could probably do an entire episode on. But yeah, I guess it was just the loaded question. Iksar didn't fall for the bait. We did.
Iksar is smarter than us. This is true. It's true.
Very, very true. And then the last question I want to talk about, this was asked by another Wild community member, which is awesome to see you guys up there and participating. White Delight, I think, asked this question. The Shaman hero power is uniquely RNG based. It summons a random totem in a random order, and it's rather unintuitive. It always summons a different totem, and it stops working after all 4, compared to the other hero powers. Has the team ever seriously discussed changing parts of Thrall's hero power? And so Iksar responds, the fact that it's different because of those things isn't necessarily a negative to us, but we have discussed changing aspects of it when we looked at the classic set and ways to change it. So that's basically in reference to the kind of the change that's happening on rotation. We also looked at the base hero powers and what classes were supposed to be good and weak at. We'll have some more details on that in a big future update, but nothing to divulge just yet. So basically, this is just one giant cliffhanger of a response.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I don't think we're going to see hero powers change. I think that's my instinct. We're not going to see any of that happen, but I think you might see some changes to the basic and classic cards to better synergize with the hero powers. I think would be
it's a very interesting response. It's kind of it's hard to sort of discern what he's exactly saying. I think the implication is that the hero power won't change. Is that's the same, like that's the takeaway that I kind of have reading that, but they did obviously look at it and like think about it and stuff. But yeah, I think that's what you're saying, right? Is that they're going to focus a lot on making the classes synergize with their hero power and redo things like that. I really wish they I think in an ideal world, the Shaman hero power would be like preloaded.
Like a predetermined order.
Yeah, a predetermined order. I think that would be ideal. You could do it like that, or you could also do it the Dr. Boom style, where you can see what totem is going to get played, like the same as Dr. Boom. So that way, there's like counterplay. You don't have to play into Maelstrom Portal of spell damage if there's no spell damage totem, right? Like instead of taking that 1 in 4 roll, both players have a bit more complete information. I think that would be an ideal, and I hope that they do that, but it doesn't read like that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think one small quality of life thing that they probably should look at is like I don't ever understand why you can't hero power anymore after you have the 4 totems on the board. Like I do not understand why that's a thing, and it's the most frustrating thing.
I didn't realize that was a thing for the longest time. So yeah, it took me a while to figure that one out.
I mean, it really sucks when you're playing stuff like Totem Shaman and you have a Totem Goliath summon 4 dudes, and then you can't hero power anymore. Like it's the most that's the part of me, or the part to me that's super unintuitive. Like why can't you hero power?
I figured out what we need to do with Odd Paladin. We need to make it so you can only have one silver hand recruit on the board at any one time. I think that's the balance change people are looking for that deck.
Oh god. All right, but we have gone a little bit long, so let's hop on to our last segment of the week. Let's talk about our decks of the week. And so normally here, what we do is we share 3 lists that Corbett and I have been playing throughout the week, both meta and off meta. But we wanted to do something a little bit different, and we are going to test this out this week. Please let us know your feedback down in the comments, because we want to know whether it's good, bad, what to improve on, potentially for future episodes. But basically what we're going to do here today is we're going to do a very mini deck primer, deck guide, whatever we're going to call it. We don't really know. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to take a list that's super popular, or is becoming popular, or super underrated. And we're going to be doing kind of a very mini kind of deck guide, basically. So how to play it in certain matchups, talk about the core cards of the deck, the flex cards, what you can change those flex cards with, depending on the meta game and all that kind of stuff. And so, first of all, we hope you guys enjoy the content. Again, let us know down in the comments below if you do, and if not, why not? But yeah, let's start off with our deck of the week. This is one that we've been talking about a lot already. We're going to be talking about the Spell Token Druid. So up on the screen is the list that I've been playing on ladder. So I'm going to run through it really quickly for those of you guys that are listening or on podcast. So it's double Innervate, double Lightning Bloom, double Living Roots, double Mark of the Lotus, double Nature Studies, double Guess the Weight, double Rising Winds, double Solar Eclipse, double Bees, double Fungal Fortunes, double Roar, double Pass. And wrapping up the deck are the 6 best cards in the list. Whispering Woods, Arbor Up, and Glowfly Swarm. So one thing that you can notice, there are absolutely 0 minions in here. This is literally Spell Druid. This is what Mage wanted to be, and failed. And yeah, the goal of the deck, just kind of general gameplay wise, is you make a wide board. You have 6 to 8 different ways to do that. And once you stick a board, you kill them, right? With buffs and roar and all that kind of good stuff. So this is a deck that's been kind of really rising in popularity in standard. We talked about this earlier on the podcast about how we think it's probably got a place in our format as well. So yeah, Corbett, do you want to go ahead and talk about what you think the core cards of the deck are? Just the cards that should be in any Spell Token Druid deck that you play.
Yeah, so I think among the 30, the easier way to do it is to talk about what the flex is, right? Because it's going to be a lot quicker. So we have the 30 cards that Meath listed. I would say the flex spots that you can look cutting. Guess the Weight, Living Roots, and Solar Eclipse potentially. Everything else on the list feels pretty core. I think the next one down, if you really need card space, might be Bees or Nature Studies. Potentially those 2. But I would say those main 3, Guess the Weight, Living Roots, and Solar Eclipse, are kind of the cards that you can look at cutting them potentially.
Yeah, so I mean, let's talk about why these cards are flex spots, right? So Guess the Weight is 2 mana to draw on average, like I think 1.5 is the math, right? Maybe a little bit higher than that because
I think it might be a little less than 1.5. Wait, you always get the 1, and then if you tie.
If you tie,
I think it's because
wrong.
I think it's because if you tie, it's slightly less than 1.5, but I'm not sure exactly.
Anyways, it's on average draw around 1.5 cards, right? So sometimes it draws you 1, sometimes it draws you 2 for 2 mana, which is pretty good. Living Roots, this is the kind of the aggro druid staple, right? The 1 mana make 2 1/1s or deal 2 damage. And then Solar Eclipse, this is the one where you double up on your next spell cast. So Guess the Weight, I think it's just, you have a ton of cards already in the deck, I would say, and the fact that it's not super consistent at drawing you 2 makes it one of the worst cards in the list. I think it's in there right now just because you want as much card draw as you can to find your Whispering Woods, your Arbor Up, and your Glowfly Swarm. At least that's my reasoning. And so all card draw, I think, to me, is good. So in what matchups, I guess, like against the aggro decks, obviously, right, where Guess the Weight is not consistent enough or too slow, or just you don't think it's good enough of a card?
I just don't think it's good enough personally. Like, I haven't been looking at Guess the Weight. I just think it's a little too low impact on average. It's not horrific, like it's not bad, but I just think there are better options than like 2 mana draw 1.5-ish kind of thing.
And then Living Roots, let's just talk about why that's a flex card as well.
Yeah, so Living Roots, it's kind of a flex card because it's so low impact that, like, if you play it early on turn 1, which is really the best point where you can play it, you're just kind of losing a hand spot for your like Whispering Woods and Glowfly. So even though you kind of get the immediate tokens, you sort of lose something in the long run. And so just because it's kind of low value, I think it's a flex. It doesn't really help a ton against some of the slower matchups as well.
I would
so
argue. Yeah. I would argue that for me personally, Living Root's made its way to the deck as a way against Kingsbane Rogue and other aggressive decks as a way to.
Yeah, you fight for board
fight for
immediately
board, right?
Against those like aggro decks.
Yeah, so that's my reasoning
just,
behind Living Roots, but I can like I do agree that it's not very good against the slow control decks, right? But it is in there for specifically Rogue, right? The 1/1s are pretty impactful against Rogue as well. And then Solar Eclipse, I don't consider this a flex card. I know we were talking about it a little bit, but the amount of games that Solar Eclipse has won me with Roar and like even doubling up Arbor up to make a board, why do you consider this a flex card?
I just think that the number of spells that it works with aren't super high. Like you do have the Arbor up, right? So the Arbor up's one. Savage Roar for lethal is the other. Fungal Fortunes is sort of the other big one, and I guess Branching Paths. So like you do have stuff, but I just think for the fact that it's a little expensive when comboing it with things like Arbor up or Branching Paths for the format. So I think that like in the dream scenarios you can get off an Arbor up, but I think against some of the more aggressive matchups it isn't particularly good. I still run it. Like I still run Solar Eclipse. But I think in a more aggressive meta, like I don't think Solar Eclipse is necessarily helping you a ton often against something like Secret Mage, even if like the double Branching Path armor can be quite good. But yeah, I just think in general, because there aren't a huge number of targets, it might be just a little much when paired with another card.
Yeah, I would also consider like Solar Eclipse Bees as a combo against aggressive decks as just like another way to also generate a board. It's not what you want to be doing against control decks, but it is another way to generate a board, and another potential synergy to point out. All right, so we've talked about kind of the three flex spots, what they're good against and what they're not good against. And so obviously, feel free to change the cards that we're talking about depending on your meta pocket, what you're seeing a ton of. And so let's talk about a few of the cards that you could be putting into the list to replace those flex cards. And so a couple cards just to kind of point out, we have Lunar Eclipse. So this is the sister card, I guess, the companion card to to Solar Eclipse. So Lunar Eclipse is a 2-mana deal 3. Your next spell costs 2 less. So basically, kind of like a free removal spell. Then you have Gibberling, and so Gibberling is a minion, yes. But what Gibberling does is because you're running so many spells in your deck that it makes Gibberling a board presence all on its own while you're drawing cards to kind of set up your Whispering Woods and Glowfly Swarms as well. It's a card that's kind of taking off a lot, I think, in Standard, as one of the sole minions in their decks. And then Corbett, you also mentioned a little bit of just running Spreading Plague. I know that's a card that was in the Standard version back in the day. And then also just like the Oaken Vargoth Zuldrak Ritualist, I believe is the name of the card. It's been a while since I've seen it. As just kind of like a good anti-aggressive kind of package of cards to run, right?
Yeah.
Let's talk about the cards themselves. So Lunar Eclipse, what is it good against, and why would you want to run Lunar Eclipse?
I mean, it's good against the decks that you expect it to be good against, right? It's good against aggro. It's good against killing a thing for free. So that way, when you make like a on 3 play, that way you're not just like passing the entire turn. You can actually kill like a Volpera Toxin or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a way for fighting for board while you do things like draw cards or, other stuff.
Yeah. So Gibberling, the concept of Gibberling is amazing, and I think it's been performing very, very well in Standard. And it's something that I probably should be trying out, but I have this dream fantasy of no minion deck that I don't want to ruin, even if it would make my deck better. But the concept behind Gibberling, I think this is just a card that's less maybe of a flex card and more of a card that just hasn't been explored, I think, to its full potential in our format. And I think it's a card that's probably good enough against aggro and slow decks alike. I can see it being good in both matchups, right? A way to generate an early board against aggro, as well as just like another way to develop a board against slow decks.
Yeah, so I think it's a card that I should have been looking to play a lot more in Token Druid. I just haven't got the chance to. But yeah, it's popping up in Standard. Gibberling, though, if you do play it, it does require a bit more build around. So it's not like the card you can just like slot. Like it's not like you can just like kind of cut one for one with Gibberling. I think that you need to really try and swap out a whole bunch of stuff to kind of get the build right. So I think, for example, like Lunar Eclipse is a card that works really well with Gibberling, just because it's like a 0 mana spell a lot of the time. Living Roots is like another 1 mana spell, is really good as well. Or something like Power of the Wild. So that way you can like pop off with Gibber, just like Gibber, coin, do a whole bunch of stuff like that on turn 1. And then maybe you can just like Power of the Wild buff on turn 2. That could be something you look at as well. But yeah, definitely getting like Lunar Eclipse and Living Roots in the Gibber deck is something that you could look at. Or even something like Adorable Infestation. Adorable isn't fantastic probably in this list, but it does work really well with Gibberling. This is like a cheap 1 mana board presence thing.
Man, I already know though, if I put Gibberling in this package, I'm gonna play a Fumble Fortunes and I'm gonna discard the Gibberlings, and I'm never gonna play them in my deck ever again. But I can totally like, I understand the reasoning though. Like, it makes a lot of sense. Everything you're saying makes sense. It makes sense with a lot of the cards that are in the deck already as well. I do think so. Like, let's say you cut Guess the Weight, right? You cut those 2 cards. You cut the 2 Solar Eclipse, and you run 2 Gibberlings and you run 2 Lunar Eclipse immediately in those 2 slots, and you keep the Living Roots. I think already then you're looking at a very, very strong package, and then you can maybe cut the Nature Studies for the Power of the Wild to bring that back in as like maybe the replacement.
I think if I was gonna do like the 6-card swap, it would be like the Gibberling and Lunar, like you said. I'd probably look to cut the bees, actually. I know we've talked about how much we like bees, but I think like bees kind of loses some value when you've already got Lunar Eclipse and Roots in there. Like, you've already got 4 cards that sort of fight back for board. And I think at that point, bees becomes a little bit redundant, and it is a little bit expensive for the list. But yeah, I don't know. You can try that out.
Try it out, guys. This is a brand new deck. This is something that is very far from being refined, so feel free to try out a couple of suggestions. And to wrap up our segment here, let's just talk about some of the general gameplay patterns, right? So against aggressive decks like Secret Mage and Kingsbane Rogue, what would you recommend as your general? I'm gonna default to you because you're a much better player than I am, so I'm just gonna let you kind of take the reins on this segment. Okay. So against aggressive decks. So when people lose, they blame you, not me. That's the whole idea.
Oh, smart. Yeah, that's what we're going for.
But against aggressive decks, what's your general Mulligan strategy, and what's your general gameplay plan here?
So the general Mulligan, I think, is you kind of just always want the Whispering Woods and Glowfly, and the Fungal Fortunes. I think those 3 cards are sort of just... You want at least one of those token generating spells. If you have like Whispering Woods and Glow, you probably don't need both of them sometimes. Because your hand gets a little bit clunky. But Fungal, I think you kind of just always want. Nature Studies is a really good keep with Fungal, because that way you can just play it on 1 and then Fungal on 2.
Yep.
Apart from that, it's mostly just those cards. Mark of the Lotus can be very solid if you have a Whispering Woods already in hand. Oh, and Lightning Bloom. Sorry, Lightning Bloom is another one that I forgot.
I was gonna interrupt there. Yeah.
Yeah, Lightning Bloom is like very, very important in the aggro matchups. Against control, it's less so, because you do have a bit more time. But being able to kind of like Fungal on 3 and then like Bloom, Glowfly, Lotus on turn 4, it's such an insane high roll. Like, you end up probably with 21 stats on the board. And so those are the big things, like a token generator, Fungal, Nature if you have Fungal, and then Lotus if you have a token generator, and Bloom. Those are like the big things. And like Living Roots is also fine, particularly I'd say particularly going first. I think Living Roots is decent.
Especially against Rogue. I also find myself keeping bees against Rogue, but not Secret Mage, just because Rogue loves to fill the board with a bunch of like 1 health minions. And so it's like a quick removal on the Buccaneer while also developing minions that they have to worry about because you run your own buffs.
Yeah.
But yeah, I good to know that I'm playing the deck the right way. And then decks like Darkly Warlock or Reno Priest. I would assume the general Mulligan strategy is look for Fungal Fortune, look for Whispering Woods, look for Glowfly Storm. Like, those are the cards.
Yeah, it's basically the same Mulligan in all matchups almost, where you can probably cut Living Roots. Not cut, but you don't have to keep Living Roots against like a slower matchup compared to something like Rogue. But overall, it's pretty much the same, I think. You just kind of look for those token generators. You look for the Fungal. You know, same kind of thing. Lightning Bloom becomes less of a desperate keep, where it's probably more important that if you're playing against a slow matchup, that you hit the token generator compared to aggro, where you kind of need the token generator and the bloom. But yeah, it's the same kind of mulligan, I'd say, in most matchups.
Yeah, I find myself holding back on the Whispering Woods or the Glowfly like a turn later than I would against aggro against the slow decks, just because what it does is it enables one or two more tokens to be on the board. And I think it's a huge deal, especially against the decks that love to ping off the minions like Darkler Warlock likes to do. Or like Reno Priest has like Penance and Smite and Penflinger, so they sometimes Priest has a lot of board clears, but sometimes they don't clear your entire board, and I think that's when like the Solar Eclipse Roar comes into play, right? Because they leave you with 4 and then you can kill. But yeah, I think the gameplay patterns, like when it comes to the Mulligan, are pretty linear compared to some of the other decks in the format. But I would say the play patterns and what you can do, because with Innervate, Lightning Bloom, and Solar Eclipse, we talk about Mana Cheat a lot on our podcast just because it's kind of the king of the format. You can do a lot of dumb things as early as like turn 3 in this deck because of Lightning Bloom and Solar Eclipse. And like you said, I think you had a board. I was watching your team the other day. You had a board full of 4/4s on turn 3 against a Kingsbane Rogue. And I was just like, okay, yeah, you only play 12 mana on turn 3. That's perfectly fine. But yeah, I'm really excited about this deck, just kind of overall. And I'm very excited that it's seen some play. Because it's been it's a ton of fun to play. I think if it becomes super popular, it's going to be very annoying because it's like, oh, I only drew 2 of my AoEs instead of 4. I guess I lose. But also, like, I'm a big fan of just like new decks seeing play and catching on. And I mean, that's how I was about Darkler before it became Degen. So maybe this deck's about to become Degen, and I have a Meowth curse, but. In general, though, I think it's a lot of fun to play, so I'm looking forward to.
Do you want to touch on the matchups real quick so people kind of know what they're getting into? So in general, what this deck is kind of good against is like aggro for the most part, and it really depends on the aggro though specifically. So it's a very good rogue counter in general is something that I found. Rogue has always been a class that struggles against things that go wide. So it's why it has such an inherent weakness to Odd Pally. This is kind of just like this is like a Treant, like Savage Roar Odd Pally. I don't know, it's a little different, but kind of the same thing. So it's good into that. It's actually good into Odd Pally itself, I found, because they can't really value trade. So if you do manage to get like a Glowfly out on turn 3 or something before they can Quartermaster, I felt that matchup is pretty solid. Dark Lair, I think, is actually pretty even because the glow, like, again, if you pop off as early, if you pop off as early as turn 3 or 4, which isn't impossible, it's pretty common actually. If they don't have the broomstick, then they just die. And that's good. That's good when they die. In terms of the matchups that it struggles against a little bit more, Priest is not fun. So both Big Priest and Arena Priest, they have a lot of board clears. They don't let you stick very much. You don't deal very well with like Scrapyard Colossuses, and you don't deal well with Psychic Scream and things like that.
Dude, Psychic Scream, man,
Psychic Scream will make you probably delete this deck. So just dodge it, guys. Just dodge your Psychic Scream. It's really easy. And slower Warlocks like Reno Lock. Actually, Reno Lock isn't that bad.
Reno Lock, if you think about it, Reno Lock has Defile and Skies as like their early game.
Yeah, but it's just that, right? And they only run 1 copy of each. So I think Cube Lock would be horrific. Because they're so consistent with the Defile and the Void Caller. But because like Reno Lock only has the 1 Void Caller, they only have like the 2 to 3 board clears with the Zeph. I found Reno Lock is actually a little bit more manageable than I expected, while still being a bit unfavored.
Yeah. Speaking of the Priest matchups, for that same reason that you talked about Reno Lock, I have found Reno Priest to be a better matchup for this deck than Big Priest. I think it's still unfavorable because they have Lash, they have Breath, they have Zeph, they have Penflinger, they have all the little pingers, but you can't deal with a turn 5 taunt with this deck. Like, very rarely can you do that. Whereas, like, sometimes the Reno Priest doesn't have all 4 of their AoEs in the top 10, 12 cards of their deck, and you stick a board. And the moment you stick a board with this deck, guys, if you haven't seen this deck, watch some gameplay, whether on Twitch or on YouTube somewhere. You can go from 0 to 100 literally with 2 cards. Right.
And when Meowth says 100, he literally means it's not impossible to get up to like 100 damage. I am not kidding. Like, it's actually pretty possible to get like up to that kind of 70, 80 range if you do have like Solar Savage Roar into like Solar Savage Roar.
I've done that before against the Priest, and I have never felt better in my life when I hit the Priest with 10 attack Wisp, dude. Like a 10-1 Wisp hitting you in the face. Like, oh, it's beautiful. But yeah, that's Spell Druid, and again, wrapping up this segment, I hope it's something that you guys enjoyed. I think this is something that Corbett and we love doing these kinds of things, and so if you guys enjoyed it, please let us know down in the comments below. We will get our stuff together when it comes to organization of this. It's again something brand new that we're working on, but if you guys enjoy it, we will work to make it a great segment. But yeah, that's gonna be it in general for us tonight. That's our State of the Wild episode, number 30. We'll be doing these every Sunday, so if you guys do enjoy our content, make sure you guys drop a subscription so you guys know when they go live. And of course, we're on Spotify, Apple Podcast, all your podcast distributors. If you want to listen on the go, make sure you guys check us out there as well. Corbett, thank you again for joining me today. Let the people know where they can find you.
Guys, you can find me at CorbettGames. So it's CorbettGames on Twitch and Twitter and YouTube and all those good platforms. So thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, and if you guys want to catch me anywhere, you guys obviously know where I am on YouTube, but you can also check me out on Twitch, twitch.tv/getmeout. I'll be back to streaming regularly next week. We appreciate you guys all watching. We hope you all enjoyed. Stay safe out there, and we will see you guys next time. Later.